answer, like, do you think that LLMs are leading to layoffs at this point? Should you just baseline your expectations nowadays that, like, yeah, if you're applying for a job, you should just assume that 1,000 people have applied, and the reason nobody's getting back to you is because they're probably kind of overwhelmed.
And they've laid off a lot, thousands and thousands of people.
So
So so it is. I mean, it's the developers have not seen this before in a long time. It's been, like you said, last one is 2010.
all right. All right. So, hi. So, this is Will, and I am lucky enough to have Ed on the call with me today. And we're going to talk a little bit about developers and the job market. I've been doing a lot of chats with folks lately about AI and LLMs, and is that going to take everybody's job? Oh my gosh, we're all going to die. And then also, there's been some questions about um, the state of the economy and how that's affecting things, especially for developers in the job market. And then since Ed and we've known each other, I think, over a decade. And I think you were saying that you've been doing this for like decades.
Since 2001.
Yeah. So that means that there's a little bit of a sense of the economic cycles, and then also what stacks are popular. So like when I go talk to folks, it's, should I be doing Java or .NET, or what other things should I be investing in? So I thought it'd be really fun for the two of us to have a nice chat about all that stuff. Hope you like the video. Stick around. And now with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ed. So Ed, why don't you introduce yourself to folks who don't know you and your background, and maybe tell me about where you're at now.
Sure. First of all, thanks, Will, for having me. Been excited about this opportunity to speak with you. So my name is Ed Nau, aka. I've been recruiting since 2001. And been in all in all technology types of roles I've recruited for. So back in the day, it was a lot of embedded development, engineers, electrical engineers doing C++ programming for microprocessors of all sorts of bits and sizes, to digital signal processors, to hardware engineers that were, designing the chips and laying them out, and making sure all the circuitry was right. Power supply, RF guys, to even ERP stuff, like SAP and PeopleSoft, and any kind of enterprise resource planning systems that enterprise uses to help run their internal organizations for their businesses, to a lot of services stuff now that we see, all the internet stuff, browser-based development that has been so big, as we call it, the big internet or web these days. And currently I'm with a small boutique shop here in the Seattle area that has been around since 2007, called West 500 Partners. We do direct hire roles, we do contract roles. We really, try to focus within the software development community here in Seattle, working with startups to smaller enterprise companies, helping them land the resources they need to help grow out their, engineering organizations and product organizations.
So when you and I were,
been with them for 5 years.
Okay, so 5 years, right? So when you and I were working together, we were mostly doing like web services scale, mostly Java backend roles.
Mm-hmm.
So we
very focused in Java developers.
Yep. Yeah, so we were at a company Dev9, and we worked with a lot of the local companies doing very large at scale cloud deployment. So we would provide contract teams for them, or developer teams. That was kind of the heart of what we were doing then, and that's where a lot of the folks that might be coming to this channel are typically like Java or .NET backgrounds for what we're going to be chatting about in some of the context and stuff. But I remember like you were always very interested in the whole community, like a little bit broader, than just the Java and the .NET folks. And I think you're talking to that a little bit. So I want to tunnel in on. I want to ask you something about something you just mentioned, which is the browser-based stuff.
Yeah,
So are you seeing a lot of people using
yeah.
like low-code, no-code tools, and then are you helping people find roles, or
More of like the TypeScript, a Node backend on AWS or GCP or any of the big cloud service providers. So usually it's complemented with a React front end or something like that, or it could be a Python Node mix backend on AWS with maybe a Flutter type of cross browser platform for mobile development. But yeah, I see it. I mean, there's startups in using that technology stack to build out their
okay?
services.
Yeah. So I just recently, I just finished. I've got an app. It's actually going through like App Store approval. It's like 1.0 for helping parents track allowances for kids, right? And so the idea was really simple. And the company that we used to use for that got acquired, and then they shut down their US business to focus on Europe and whatever. And so we needed an allowance tracker. So I wound up using Supabase, which is a Postgres hosted company. And initially I tried a couple of other stacks, and then I wound up falling back on something called SvelteKit, which is another web framework. It's very similar to React or Vue or one of those. So I'm probably going to do a video on like what does it look like to do modern TypeScript for the Java developer. That's like a video I've got friends that
Mm-hmm.
are asking me to do, and we'll be rolling out soon. So so when you say like that kind of stuff, it's more TypeScript. It's not like no code tools like Wix or Flutterflow or something like that.
Maybe for a proof of concept or something like that. I haven't had clients or a specific request for anything of no code types of frameworks to build out an application. I hear about it sometimes, but I haven't seen it or had to work on
Well, and I
one.
guess that begs the question if like, like we used to use Squarespace to host the website, you know, and it was like, well, we have a whole company full of developers. Why did you build your website with Squarespace? And I was like, because it's a giant distraction, like click and
Mm-hmm.
shoot, put your content up, move on, get on with your life, keep your devs working on dev projects, And so I don't know that I would
Right.
hire, like, I'm not going to hire unless I've got some very odd thing that I'm doing. I doubt that I'd ever make an FTE hire just to keep my Squarespace site going. That's a content editor job, not a developer job, right? And
Right.
maybe that's the
Right.
implication is, if all I'm doing is cloud services for like Airtable or Google Docs, it's like I'm not hiring a developer for that, right?
Right. You're just putting the pieces together and creating the content to show.
So I guess, all right, so first of all, the market in general for developers right now, we were sort of before we hopped on the call, we were talking about a little bit, and you were talking about it being not
Mm-hmm.
a great market right now. So let's kind of revisit
Mm-hmm.
that for a
Yes.
minute. So what are your thoughts on the Java developer market, and what's driving it? Like, why is it the way it is?
Yeah, I think just across the board, not just even the Java development market and bigger enterprise companies, depending on what services you are working on for them, could have lost their job just because the application or service, other engineers could have maintained it unless they're building something new out. But I think just across the board, as any type of developer building out services, whether you're a serverless developer, a Python developer, Java developer, .NET developer. There's been a lot of dismantling of companies, running out of money across the board. Companies really just slimming down unnecessary overhead, unnecessary projects that aren't that important and crucial to the business overall, and they're cutting costs across the board. We've seen it since the beginning of this year, and me being in this market every day, talking to engineers and dealing with these companies that are funded by VC, venture capitalists. I think I was comparing it to the real estate market. I was saying that to you. Like when the rates were low, it was very easy, or easier for people to invest money into companies to build out an idea to take to market and try and generate revenue from that. And you can make that money last a bit longer with the interest rates being down. So I would say, I started seeing things back in May of 2022, right around there, even before. And with all the content that's created out there on the internet, they had tools, they had scrapers. I think it was called Tracker, some layoff tracker, or something like that, and it would be scraping for articles of companies that were going under or folding, and most of them were VC based seed round or Series A or Series B, Series C types of companies that were dependent on the amount of money that was infused to them to keep them going and hire the skilled talent to help build out their products. So, that was happening then. And then as we got closer to the end of 2022, you started seeing the big guys, the biggest guys out there cutting things off, having big layoffs, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. And that really triggered an onset within the market. Rates were still going up. And here we are in November 14th, 2023. And I think we're talking the market, the overall market, as far as the stock market, NASDAQ seems to be staying steady. It's nice and green. All the buttons are nice and green this morning, and have been consistently more so than red and going down. But you're still seeing some layoffs. You're still hearing of those. Literally, I've seen people and heard people, get an offer, and then before they even start, it's rescinded, or they join, they're on for a month or two, and they're gone. And that's how it's been. And I think a lot of developers across the board, if you haven't been in this market for if you have less than 10 years experience in this market, or 12 years, maybe no more, you've never experienced anything like this. It was, you've never had a problem with a recruiter or 100 recruiters reaching out to you a day. Never had a problem for getting a job offer, or five job offers. And each time you get a new job, you get a raise and more equity or something like that. And it's definitely like feels like a sinking ship, like in some ways. It's not all the way down. It never goes all the way down. It gets salvaged. In my experience, being in this since 2001, and me saying this is the third cycle or downtime or recession or whatever you want to call it. This is the third one that I've been in where things are hot. You come into an office, it's packed, it gets reduced, and hopefully you're the one that's left still working
Because
hard.
the other two were the .com crash, 2001, and then the 2008 crash. And
yep, exactly.
The causes were a little different economically, because one of them was just overheated specific tech sector stuff, which...
Well, I would say the first one is definitely I was very new to the industry. It was the .com bubble, but it was also the telecom bust too. Telecom, all those skills started fading out. There was a huge number of telecom products, telecom companies, hardwire stuff, right? I can't even remember a lot of the terms there, But, I remember being in that market as a young person and talking to these people with master's degrees and 20 years of experience being laid off and being like, oh my gosh, what's this person has a great background. They're so skilled. They're so smart. They have a good education and they have no job. What's going on? And then we had the whole Enron thing, and then we had the war, and yeah, it was the office that I joined in, recruiting office, was 24 people and got whittled down to 9 people. And luckily, I was one of those nine
Yeah.
people.
Well, both. I mean, you were mentioning real estate a little bit ago, and the job market and real estate. One thing that they both share as market a market analysis is that the vast majority may not be changing, but if enough of the people who are changing are experiencing, like if you have a situation where you go from a 3% unemployment rate to a 9% unemployment rate, right? Well, one way to look at that would be to say, well, you're going from 97% of the people working to 93. That shouldn't be that big of a deal, except it has this massively outsized impact on pricing power for the employee seeking a job vis-a-vis their employer, depending on the perception of how many people there are in the market that you can pick up. And so that's what's always kind of strange, is how,
Mm-hmm.
like with a house, you might have a whole bunch of comps. Like if the last 5 sales in your neighborhood are showing a certain trend, that could affect the value of 1,000 homes, right?
Yeah,
Um, it's kind
yeah.
of a weird space, and I guess that's what's a little unsettling for a lot of the developers, and that's what's underlying some of the anxiety. Is I don't know if I'm going to have a job, and even if I do I have the right skill set? Um, I guess really quickly, so like a lot of people are blaming AI and LLMs for that, and so
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you answer. Like, do you think that LLMs are leading to layoffs at this point?
No, no, no.
Yeah,
It's a new, but it's a new sector. It's a new discipline. You're still going to have regular engineering, and you're going to have AI engineering. Um, you still have to have the services. You still have to have the infrastructure. You still have to have front ends. But AI is definitely a trend, and I know, Will, that AI is
right.
automation, right? And we've been automating software and we've been automating tasks for the last 30 years, and continuous delivery. Like that's what we were big on at Dev9, and setting up those types of continuous delivery services to, one, to speed up code to production, and to put that code into production, put better code into production by creating better automated tests through that too. And that whole process took away a lot of the quality assurance
Oh yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Remember, like devs and SDETs are still out there. QA, if you were a dev, you were a dev. You didn't test. Like I remember, like even back at Dev9, like talking to some people over on the East Coast or something. Like, so how do you test your code? Oh, I'm not a tester. I'm like, oh, okay.
Right, right. Well,
Like you don't unit test. Like every dev now should unit test. Have some kind of test cases around their piece of code that they're building and submitting. And that's one thing that QA used to do a lot of, and QA went away,
well,
right? But there still was a demand for
yeah, and part of
developers.
the nuance I would make, and this is the thing about this is the heart of the conversation around the automation stuff, is like let's say you were the shoe cobbler and you made shoes by hand, and then now you go in and there's a shoe factory and it makes 1,000 shoes a day, so you're not competitive anymore. But there's a skill set challenge
Mm-hmm.
there too, which is like in the late 90s you could be like an HTML person, and you're like, what do you do? I build websites, I do HTML or whatever, and it was a pain, and you had to do it a lot by hand. The visual builder tools were kind of weak, and so you could get kind of like what I'm going to, for lack of a better description, call like kind of a middle class job, just writing web pages or doing manual QA testing. I knew people who that was what they did. Is they went into work every day, they'd write the
Hmm.
documentation and the plans, they do it manually, and the skill set bar was low. And part of what happened was a lot of those folks got filtered out as it turned into an SDET conversation. Like, oh, well, do you know how to do JUnit or NUnit or C# stuff? And maybe you're not hardcore production, but you at least need to do it, or Selenium or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so one of the tensions always was kind of the sense of like, well, if you're good enough and you're sharp enough, then we'll train you and you can go do the next thing. And one of the ones that I think it might be underlying some of the anxiety is learning how an AI or an LLM works, is, especially if you're trying to build one, that's a hardcore data science endeavor. That's not right.
Yes.
And so you're not going to,
It's
mm-hmm.
modeling.
And the language set might be different. It's like, oh, I'm doing Python and Pandas and I have a hardcore, I have a master's or PhD in
Hmm.
statistics or something. So if you're just like a line Java developer and maybe you've been doing web services at scale for a while, you're not going to suddenly become an AI LLM person. Um, a lot of the folks that I've been talking to who are in the space, when they're doing an LLM or an AI integration, what they're really doing is just using some web services to call some other AI tech stack and then building some UI or front end type
Hmm.
stuff. And so the question is, I could see a scenario where software gets better quality because the developers are building it have supports. Like, so
Hmm.
right now, I personally, when I do stuff, I use ChatGPT and I use Copilot, and I also use some local
Hmm.
ones. And, it kind
Yeah.
of feels like the same way I might use IntelliSense or a good IDE to help me deal with writing my code and whatever. Like, I'm using it to replace looking up documentation. I have it write snippets for me,
Yep.
but it doesn't do
Hmm.
anything that or let me rephrase that. I have to review everything it does. There's no way I could
Yeah.
cut and paste and
Yeah.
put stuff into production. So the concern is that let's say that you get, and this is to tie these two threads together, is let's say that I only have to reduce my development team by 20%, because let's say I'm using the AI and the LLM stuff, and I think I can now get rid of that. Well, that doesn't mean that everybody's out of a job, but it does mean that you go through potentially this period of time where the market for developers gets rough, right? Because if 20% of the developers all got fired, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I do, and I think there is, there is some concern there, but I mean, again, like we've gone through these transitions before. We've gone through these cycles, and each time new jobs come out of whatever the new revolution is, and that's kind of what we're going through right now. Is we're going through this AI revolution. It is, it's automation. We're using it more. We're creating these LLMs to automate more tasks that take us longer to do, like go through things. But you still need that human touch on things too, and that's kind of what Um, it's data. It's automating data and using data to its full effect more cohesively for the company that has it. And that's kind of one of the big markets too in this new AI revolution is a lot of these companies have all this data and they're not using it. It's private data too. And that's another concern within AI is just the privacy and security within it too. But it's creating these LLMs, large language models, and automating things to speed up processes faster, gather information faster, analyze information faster, analyze thousands of things at the same time faster. But like you said, you still need the human eye on that analysis to read it over, check it, go through it, understand it, whatever you're trying to gather from it, you still need to put your eyes and human brain on it to take it to the next level of whatever it's being used for. So
Yeah. So like
in
if I
that
said,
way,
"Hey, I just took a bunch of data from my back end. Let's say I'm using my job tracker, whatever I'm my candidate, my ATS or whatever, right? Um, and if somebody said, "Hey, well, we've gotten rid of all the reports that thing does. Now we just have a chatbot UI." And would you trust the data that came out from that in November of 2023?
I mean, the data is going to be targeted to whatever specifics or whatever model it's designed for. I think a lot of it's going to be good. Is it going to be 100%? No.
But that's the irony, right? Because like
But
if you
it's
use an ATS today, you'd get the report and the data, and you'd know it's as good as whatever the data was. But if I
mhm.
processed it by an LLM, you know,
um, so I know this. Hopefully, this is on the same track. So I went to a meetup. Actually, we went to the GeekWire AI
okay,
Summit,
cool.
and met a guy there. He's building out a new company. He's building out, I guess, LLMs for companies in a way. And he was using one example of, it's a very small example, but and this has to, all related to recruiting. He was working with a Filipino company, and he took his AI model or whatever into their parameters for the job search and the resumes and stuff like that. And um, out of 100 resumes that they generated for the job, um, he applied his AI model to those 100 resumes, and I guess it came out picking the one that they ended up hiring. Now, was that just a coincidence? Was that just a small little piece of numbers that just happened to work out right? What kind of job was it? I'm not sure. But, I don't think at a high scale that I think it can speed up gathering again resumes just like any Boolean search and stuff like that. And you can put a chat bot onto certain recruiting processes to schedule interviews. You still have to do like a video screen of the person or some kind of um, asking questions and getting a visual if that's important to you, or just listening to good communication and explanation on answering the questions, um, to help kind of speed up whatever minimal requirements you expect them to meet through those two stages. But again, if you're working with someone, aren't you going to want to put eyes and ears on this person too, and have a conversation with them on how you're going to collaborate, how you're going to argue, how you're going to solve a problem, how you approach problems, how you write code, how you think about testing,
Well, yeah, and
um,
most of that stuff, like if you're
forecasting.
a very talented recruiter who's got specific background in the space, then you might be able to read that from some of that from a resume, but a lot of it you may not know. And maybe this is kind of like a little bit broader step back, but like a lot of folks, like let's say you're a developer and you punch and you see like a job listing and you're like, yeah, okay, I'll apply. You know,
Mm-hmm,
like LinkedIn, I think, and some of these others have like
mm-hmm,
one click apply and whatever, right? And then it gets really daunting because you'll see, like, for example, on LinkedIn, a typical job might be like, oh, yeah, we've had 800 people apply, right? Is that kind
yeah,
of,
yeah.
and then you send it off and then you never hear back from anybody, right? So I guess on behalf of the recruiting industry almost, which is totally unfair, but like, you know, if you're a developer and are you just not going to, should you just baseline your expectations nowadays that like, yeah, if you're applying for a job, you should just assume that 1,000 people have applied. And the reason nobody's getting back to you is because they're probably kind of overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
even if they have good intentions, um, like you might, even if you were a 1 in 10, now you're one of 100 people. And so then by the time you actually even do face to faces, like how many how many face-to-face interviews are you even going to run? Like, I mean, most roles we'd bring in like 5, maybe, right?
If that, I mean,
Well, and now,
yeah, at the most, I guess. I
yeah.
mean,
So should as a developer, should you just get
if
really zen about the fact that like this all is going to be pretty grim odds, and you should be chill and don't take out your frustrations on the recruiter, right?
no, that's a good point. I mean, it again, it goes back to these levels that we haven't seen in a while, and you know, software development has been a huge increase in the last 10 years of people getting into that and getting into all those coding schools to learn JavaScript and TypeScript and learn those frameworks because there was so much web development going on. Companies taking a digital presence, building a service of some sort, having some kind of digital aspect to their company, that there was a huge, there was a lot of flow, there was a lot of cash flowing in that space, and it's come to a halt. It really has. A lot of these companies are not there anymore, or just minimal, to make their runways last as long as they can for the amount of cash that they have on hand from their VC or the minimal amount of revenue that they're making. And they've laid off thousands and thousands of people.
So
So so it is. I mean, it's the developers have not seen this before in a long time. It's been, like you said, last one is 2010. We started coming out of it in 2010, and things started
yeah.
picking up more. And ever since then, it's been increasing in demand and demand and demand, just like the house market. Is it going to be a snap of the fingers? No, it's not. I don't, and we're getting into the slow time again now. Thanksgiving and
Yeah.
December, right? End of the year. Even when things are hot, that's still slow. The last 2 weeks of December are usually nothing, and then it slowly gets ramped back up in January. So we'll see. I think, until really the market really shows that it's settled, interest rates are holding or come down a little bit, that's when we'll start seeing more movement and more companies wanting to spend money, to pump into their systems. And they're soon going to have to, I imagine, if they want to grow at all and scale. So,
Yeah, I mean
but
the cycle on the economics, part of what does make that part somewhat better is a lot of the economics being tied to the rates, which nobody can control. If you can control the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy, then I don't know why you're worrying about developer jobs. You could go make a stack ton of money in finance. The point being
mhm,
is like, if the rates dropped next year, then potentially significantly, then you could see things get really good again in that sense, right? I think
yeah,
from a personal agency standpoint, as a developer, all you can control are things like, my current job, do I stay, do I move, and then what skills do I learn to try to be positioned for when hopefully the market gets better. Because if the market gets bad or stays crappy, or let's say, it really does, like there's certain apocalyptic scenarios, like let's say ChatGPT just announces tomorrow some new version that you can literally interactively just build apps, and it's like, why would you build apps anymore, because it just gets transformed. That to me feels like jumping ahead too much. It's like,
mhm,
um, I'm not going to move to the north of Canada next week because I'm thinking global climate change is going to be a factor. You know, right now you need to live your life and you have to kind of plan the way it is, where things may be in 50 years, or in the case of tech, even 5 years from now. You kind of can jump ahead too much and
mhm,
overthink it. Um, so you mentioned like code camps a minute ago. So My
Mm-hmm.
sense is that a lot of the code camp people were not being necessarily adequately prepared. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess just to really quickly sort of put a button on that one, I would not personally recommend somebody do a code camp. Would you?
I mean, it's very, if you're just putting something simple together, sure. If you're building out complicated services that need to scale, it's going to be very difficult to have the necessary training and understanding from one of those code camps. You know, it, there has been some good people that have come out of it. And those people uh, may have a higher intelligence than others. I mean, there's people out there that are just super smart. We know that, right? I mean, and maybe they just took a wrong path earlier in their life, and this is how they got into development. I mean, it's some of the best developers I know are music majors. Um, so it's talent.
I guess to
But I
state it
would,
another way, if you go through a code camp, you might get if you are sharp, know computers really well, go through a code camp, that might get you an entry level job, but it's not like I took a code camp for 6 weeks or 3 months or even 6 months, and now I'm going to get a six-figure job being a kick-ass developer. That's not a realistic thing, right?
right. No, it's a lot of, connecting, finding the right little solution snippet, and copy and pasting, something to make a solution, which you can do if it's not too complicated of a
Right.
solution. But as you scale and get bigger and things get more complicated, those things are going to break down, and you really need to know how to code hard.
So let's kick
So,
up from the noob who thought that was a good idea. I want to kick to kind of the other end. So let's say that you were a Java developer for the last 5 to 7 years. So you've been in it long enough that you
mhm,
got something, you know. But you're sitting there and you're like, LLMs on the left, on the left of me, TypeScript and JavaScript on the right, like servers and cloud. Maybe a lot of the Java developers, they're like, well, I thought I was a Java developer, but now I'm a cloud configuration person because I'm spending half my time just uploading snippets to AWS or whatever. Um,
yeah,
so let's
yeah.
say that you were talking to somebody in that space and what would be the advice that you might give somebody who's a Java dev? Call it 5 to 7. So they haven't been through this kind of crash or recession feel, job decline market, even 10%, right? And they're trying to figure out,
Hmm.
okay, I want to be well positioned. Maybe they have their job now and they just want to be well positioned in the next year or two. What would you tell
Yeah.
them?
Well, I would tell them that Java probably still not going to go away. It's for the bigger enterprise companies, it's going to be there. It's a very scalable language that you can build huge amounts of things on it. But I would also tell them that you got to constantly be learning new tools. A lot of stuff. Microservices, understanding microservices architecture, knowing how to manage those and build infrastructure and use the tools for those, whether it's Kubernetes or any of those, you know, being a robust, full, complete developer, knowing the infrastructure, knowing that, learning the node framework, understanding that back end and how they use those. Cloud. Cloud's cloud. You got Azure, you got AWS, you got GPC. They all do the same things. They all have the same tooling called different stuff. You got infrastructure as code, you got CloudFormation, you got Terraform, you got Pulumi, you got all this stuff. You got managing those services, being knowing how to push good code. I would tell them, knowing how to push good code in production is never going to go away. Being a good tester, whether you're doing Java or you're doing JavaScript or TypeScript, it's all the same best practices. Make sure you stay on top of those. And maybe try and get a different role in a different language. It's, if it's a different JVM language. I'm seeing a lot of, backend services being built out with
Really? Okay.
Kotlin. There's Scala out there too, but those are easy transitional languages that company uses on their back end. So, I would just say there's a lot of opportunity still out there, even though it seems it's grim. Companies, depending on what size they are and where they're at in their product life cycle, need experienced people that have been at big companies to come in and understand what they're trying to accomplish. They understand the why of the business and apply the tooling to the business technology stack that they're going to use to build out their product.
So
for a
yeah,
Java
yeah, go ahead.
developer, yep. So for a Java developer, that's 5 years, and they're very good at Java. I mean, they understand back-end
Mm-hmm.
services well. They understand databases. They understand containers. I know they do the frameworks. All it's all code. It's all the same. Just learning different tools, whether it's a TypeScript and a back-end framework, which is usually Node and something. It's still going to be AWS, or you could even have it on straight up hardcore
So
servers.
all right.
Same too, and you can build
So
out.
here's the question I asked. So let's say that you had two candidates. One of them is, let's say they both have about 5 years professional, but one of them is just Java Spring Boot web services. Maybe they know the ROM and the database and some relational stuff. Then I've got another candidate that's got 5 years of JavaScript, TypeScript. They know JavaScript, TypeScript, ORM, and they're very comfortable with cloud deployment stuff to AWS, whatever. I guess two questions. One, which of those two candidates is going to be easier to find a job? And then two, are they going to get the same salaries or different salaries?
Good questions. And again, it's going to all be relative on the company that's hiring, the size of the company, where they're at in their, willingness to pay.
But like as a recruiter, if you got two resumes on your desk, which one would you be more jazzed about? Like, which one are you like, hey, I'm going to place that guy,
It's going to be what is my client hiring for, and what is their tech stack? Well, is it a full stack TypeScript one, or is it a Java one? Obviously, as a recruiter, I'm going to present the JavaScript, someone that's been more focused in full stack JavaScript to a company that's building out their services that way versus
obviously
Java.
you don't go to a client, and if the client is like, we're a Python and .NET shop, you don't show up with a Java candidate and be like, this guy's awesome, unless you're desperate to do that. What I'm kind of getting at is more like the market sizing, like as in, are you seeing more demand from companies across the spectrum for one stack or the other, or are you kind of like, I mean, and maybe the answer is it's just the same but different.
Well, yeah,
I don't know.
It's relative on the size of the company and where they're at. A lot of the startups are not starting out on Java.
So what's the favorite Java?
They're either Python or they're like a TypeScript. Full stack TypeScript is what they want to do. Some of them are using Go, Golang.
One of the nomenclature bits that I've come across is, I feel like if I say I want a JavaScript person, then it's like a flighty web dev type who does little bits of JavaScript on the front end. But if I say I want a TypeScript developer, then what I'm saying is, yeah, we're using Node, but I want a real developer. I want someone with a good, strong CS background who, is legit and does stuff. And kind of like,
That would be definitely a Java developer coming up into a TypeScript role
right.
who is, very heavy Java, or C sharp, have built out a lot of services that way. And now they just do everything, and they prefer the JavaScript or TypeScript, whatever you want to call it,
Is that
type of
so? Would
services.
that be would you tell a Java developer, go, let's say that you're like, hey, I'm going over the weekend and I'm thinking about maybe I'll take a class or read books or whatever. If I'm a Java developer, am I better off? But I'm like not sure if I want to stay doing Java or I want to just have multiple stacks. Would Kotlin be a more productive place to put my time, or TypeScript? Okay.
TypeScript.
That was kind of the heart of it.
Yep.
Um, and
Yep.
I'll just note, like, so I spent a lot of time dunking on JavaScript over the years as a Java developer, right? Like, it was like, I'm, I don't do that little, silly, browser stuff. It's untyped kind of terribleness. Now that I built a nice project and deployed it with a TypeScript stack, I'm kind of astonished at how much I like it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there was and I think one of the things that negatively influenced me was that I looked at TypeScript several years ago when it was kind of raw and early. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
when I first looked at TypeScript, basically there were no libraries or tools that supported it. And so every single time you'd go to like work with a library, they were like, oh, and now you can write the types yourself by hand. And when I sat down to do TypeScript stuff, I think I first started April, right? And so I'm using WebStorm from JetBrains as my IDE. It's just like IntelliJ, but for TypeScript stuff. I flip on every check, and so now I'm like getting all the static type messaging and stuff. And long story short, once I got over the hump, I actually wound up really liking it. Do you get the sense that folks that work in those environments are liking what they're doing? Like if I'm a TypeScript dev or a Java dev, or how are they liking their jobs?
Yeah, they like it. I would say probably 3 years ago, I was asking them that question as you started seeing more TypeScript versus JavaScript the job descriptions, or just like the client managers asking for that type of developer. And like, well, what do you think about TypeScript versus JavaScript? And I get a lot of, I like it. I like it. It's great. It's easier. It catches things. And then, there's a few people that were just like, yeah, I don't want to use that. No, just kind of a little bit older school, not wanting to change. And one of the other negative things that I heard about it was just a little bit harder to troubleshoot sometimes, find a bug or something like that. But other than that, yeah, I mean, it gets the job done. Um,
Yeah. I mean, and on
it's
the Java side, I was always surprised at how many developers didn't know the advanced debugging tools for deployment stuff in practice. And so
mm-hmm,
then I would wind up, showing them how to do stuff, how to deal with like heap dumps in prod and getting them back to developers so they could figure out what the hell was going on. And I mean, like those kinds of things. The JavaScript and Node side is building that world out. And that has gotten a lot better in the last few years. Um, let's see. So we're coming up we're getting close to the hour mark, which is I think about as long as we can expect
mm-hmm.
folks to sit through a call or through the chat. Any topics? I guess I have one, which is and this is more of a generic one, but it's kind of fun since you get to again represent the entire recruiting community. Haha. Which is like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm a developer and I see a JD that's listed, a job description, and it's got, like 18 different things on it where it's like, be a Java person, a .NET person, a TypeScript person. Oh, and you should also know data science and blah, 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 blah. What's your advice to somebody who sees a JD like that? Would you tell them to bother to click apply? Would you tell them to just skip it? like, would you say, don't waste your time because that's a sign that the recruiting team and the hiring manager can't even sort out what they're really looking for, so it's likely to be a waste of time? Any just real quick advice for somebody who sees a JD like that?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me to say no to anything. um, Being as a salesperson, recruiting, like you get no's a lot. You see difficulties. You try to overcome those. I mean, if it's not going to take too much time, and it's something that you're interested in, go and you don't see it too unreasonable, go ahead and apply for it. But if it's just like three different skill sets or three different people for one role, that's not going to happen. It's just, people do stay in their lanes for the most part. I mean, if it's a small startup company, sure, you got to wear a lot of hats as a full rounded developer, a tester, an infrastructure person. But you can't, data science is going to be totally different. And again, it's going to be relative on the size of the company. Like, big companies, you're going to be more isolated in certain tasks versus smaller companies, you're just wearing more hats. But to add to, like, for people just job hunting, and we were talking about this before, like, get out there and network, get out there and get back out to some meetups, whether they're online or, they're in their cities, and meet people. And you will find people there that are looking to hire, and you will find people that are wanting to get hired as well.
So
Um,
does an online
so
meetup work for networking?
I mean, you can gather names and you can reach out to people through LinkedIn that way. Or they may have like an open chat, and you just get a chance to state your name and that you are looking for work, and people can write that down and follow up with you, or you give your phone number or contact information out. Um, but at networking meetings, in-person networking meetings, which are coming back a lot, and I just went to one last week. There was a good 50 people plus out there, and everyone to give time before and after for people to sync up and meet and greet. And even during the presentation, they'll have people stand up and introduce themselves really quick and say if they're looking or not. So it's just a good chance to get face to face and really get some good hard contacts with people,
And so
for job
so if
opportunities.
somebody has not done face to face because maybe they started right before COVID or whatever, like, so the
Mm-hmm.
etiquette might be just go to the face to face, do the onlines. The recruiter or whoever, get their card and follow up and drop them an email as a courtesy, if just in case. But the recruiter
Mm-hmm.
typically will take the name and number of the dev that they're interested in. Don't print cards as a random developer because that looks silly, right? Like, just show
Yep.
up, get the recruiter's card if you can, or the HR card, send them a nice email.
Or definitely have your mobile phone, have your LinkedIn app. They have the QR code on that, and it's easy to scan. Learn how to use that in the search button. And two other things that are
Yeah.
really important: be
Uh-huh.
humble and don't be prideful. Put yourself out there. Introduce yourself to people. Just, hey, what brings you here? And you just start talking, and they'll ask you the same thing. What are you doing here? Oh, I'm out here networking. I'm a Java developer. I'm looking for roles. Contract full time. It's right now, you got to put yourself out there. You got to network, you got to meet people, and you got to be open to different opportunities. You may not get your certain title that you want, but it depends on how bad you need a job as
Right.
well.
Yeah, one of the ones,
um,
and this makes me laugh, is that a lot of the best devs I've known, they can suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome, right?
mhm,
And so one of the pieces of advice that I've tried to give is like, well, if a recruiter says something like, well, we're looking for an expert in blah, right? Like, we're looking for a TypeScript
mhm,
expert or whatever. Don't get hung up on that subjective term. Just say, hey, look,
yeah,
well, I've done 2 years, and I've done 5 years of Java. And that will convey to the recruiter, or the hiring manager what they need, and then don't get so hung up on the expert or not, because that can be stressful for
Right.
folks. Um,
Right. I mean, it's all the same. Like Java does the same thing as TypeScript on the back end. It's doing the same functions, all that stuff. It's just a different
right,
language. You have all the different bottlenecks. You have all you have all the same problems that you got to investigate. You have all that stuff that, if you're a good dev and you've been through growing, scaling products and seeing things grow, you can apply those same concepts to any other stack in any language, any
right.
tools. Just got to learn the tools a little bit quicker, maybe.
Well, and that's where and that's where this sort of circles back. Like, I'm writing TypeScript. I wrote Swift because I did the Apple Watch client, right? So I had to learn some
Mm-hmm.
Swift, because even to just do Hello World in Swift, it's like a new thing. The way I was able to come up to speed on that was I watched some videos to get oriented, and then I literally, as I was trying to do things, I would open up the Chat GPT window or Copilot, and I would say things to it like, "Well, in Java, I would do this. How do I do this same thing in Swift?" And then the LLM would respond, and so it became a learning tool that was very powerful for me. And so that's where, like, I don't know, I wouldn't go to a recruiter and say, and if they said, well, I've got a .NET role, or, I've got a .NET role, and, if the person's only ever done Java, say, well, I think it'd be a bit much to go to them and say, well, it doesn't matter because I can just chat GPT to like do everything. Right. Like that. And that feels like
Right.
an almost
Right.
an etiquette thing, not because you might actually be fine in the job and actually might work, but you wouldn't say that to somebody. Right.
No. No. And then the recruit, if an experienced recruiter that knows what they're doing, they know a good dev. The dev, like you taught me. Honestly, you've taught me so much about interviewing and understanding processes and pushing code around. Um, that when you ask a developer a question about how they do something, they're going to explain it to you just like you did. The professor will. And when they do that, they know what they're doing, and
So you and I used to sit next
they
to
can
each
they can do.
other, and then we would work together. So you'd talk to candidates and I could listen to you talking, and then we worked together on building that out. So when you're saying that, that's not like we literally spent years working right next to each other. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and you gave all the talks that you gave. You would sit in your office and you just whiteboard things out, and um, it was yeah. You didn't teach me how to code, but you taught me how coders work.
Yeah. I mean, so this is one topic that we could
You know?
probably spend another hour on, which is
Oh
the
yeah.
and one of the things I always thought was really interesting was how, like, you and I might talk about Java or .NET or TypeScript or Java or PHP or Python or whatever. And it's like, well, there's the language and there's the, what do you do with it and all that. There's a cultural component. Like, a .NET developer and a Java developer may have a very different culture, like how they approach solving
Yeah,
problems and stuff. And so that,
definitely.
and that became a
Yeah.
proxy for, like, so there was a company that I was just talking, with another guy that I used to work with, and we were at a company that was switched from PHP to Java back in like 2008, 9, right?
Uh
And
huh.
part of the reason that they switched from PHP to Java was because they could not hire PHP developers with a CS background, really. Like, they wanted really
Yeah.
good scalable people, and even though PHP had added a bunch of modern tech, the PHP community wasn't adopting it because they were like, no, man, we're just
Yeah.
scripting little web pages here. Like, why are you making our life
Right.
more complicated? And then the Java developers were like, I don't care how fancy PHP is. There's no way in hell I'm taking a PHP job and putting PHP on my resume for 2 years. Like, no, like, unless you're paying me to
Right.
retire, like, I'm not doing it. Right. And so the
Yeah.
ecosystems and the cultures. And so, like, we could probably spend another hour just going through all
Totally.
those and whatever.
There's so much of that. Yeah.
All right.
It's
So,
yeah.
so really,
So
yeah.
much
So,
of
so
that.
just to put a to bow on it. Job market for devs right now and probably at least through the end of the year is going to suck. That's just the way it is.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yep, just the way
Um,
it is.
it's premature to blame AIs or LLMs for putting people out of work. That's not really what's going. It's the
Yep.
underlying economic cycle stuff. Um,
No, no. AI is just a new revolution of again automating more stuff within the
and so
tech
it may
stack.
have an impact, but right now, at least, you don't see it from a jobs and hiring, and I don't see it from a implementation. Like today, like there's very few sectors that I think that this tech is good enough that it would wipe out more jobs than frankly it's creating. Like I mentioned a friend of mine who literally just got a job offer this morning integrating an LLM into some of their tech stack, that stuff that they're doing. And then in terms of
Mm-hmm.
stacks, like if you said, hey, what's your, if you're a Java developer or a .NET developer and you want to learn something over the holidays, TypeScript might be a good one. Docker
Sure,
Kubernetes, if you had,
TypeScript or Docker. Yeah, any infrastructure tools, any new testing tools. Yeah, anything that comes out. Any cloud tools, browser-based tools, testing tools. I mean, that's used across the board. So always just be learning
yeah.
something new to apply to your background, your tech background.
Yeah, I mean, the cockroaches of the industry are going to
And
be SQL, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, TypeScript stuff, scaling out on cloud infrastructure. Those are all just, you got to know
mhm,
that stuff cold.
you got to know
Yeah.
that stuff. Yes, you got to know how to scale. You got to know, yeah, if you know architecture, like being smart about that. Um,
So if you're so to put a bow on it, to really finish it this time. So what's your website? What's the website? So you can so if
West500partners.com
you so if
for
you're a
our business.
developer, especially in the Seattle area, right? Because you do mostly
Hmm.
local.
We're not
Oh,
right now. No, we're all over the
so all over
place.
the
So,
U.S.
um,
So if you're
yep,
a
yep. We've actually been in Japan. We've been in Brazil. We were doing some searching over in Europe and Germany this year.
all
So
right,
we've been all over.
killer. So if you're a developer and you like the talk, you should definitely check out your site. I will put a link in the description, just
Yeah,
like you do for all the things, right? Um, and I gotta say, Ed, this has been a lot of fun. So I haven't done
yeah. I
these
know.
interview videos. I hope that for people listening, it's valuable and helpful for them, and all
Yeah.
that. And
And anyone that listens, feel free to reach out to me, Edward Nau at LinkedIn. Super easy to find. NAU. It'll be me most of the time. Would love to talk with you. Love to talk to you about tooling. Love to talk about software development, background, anything that you wanna do in the future. And
yeah, man,
yeah, love to help out any
it's
way I can.
always good to catch up. All right, so I will put, like I said, the
Yes.
link to your LinkedIn and to your website into the description. And anybody watching, I've worked with Ed for years. He's a good guy. Check it out. It's great stuff. Thank you
Thank you,
guys
Will.
so much.
Appreciate it.
All right.